Why has music all started to sound kind of the same? Why does it feel like there are fewer artists who are pushing the boundaries of their art? Are they really not out there anymore, or are they simply being buried by the algorithm? There are a lot of people here on YouTube who will tell you how to increase your streaming numbers to become more successful as an artist.
Yes, it takes a little bit of the art away from creating music. I know a lot of people are bothered by that. But if your goal is to make a living making music, you have to operate like a business.
To summarize, you give the algorithm or the masses more of what they want, more of what has already worked in the past. And they're not wrong. You'll see an increase in your numbers if you do that. But are numbers worth what we give up in order to obtain them? As artists, it kind of feels like we're living in the assembly line era of music. There are algorithmically dictated formulas in place for us to follow. And if you choose to step even slightly outside of that box, you're effectively punished. And I think there's an even bigger price to pay for chasing this sort of success. And there's a question that we should be asking that's more important than any of this. Is this really what's good for the music itself as an art form? If conformity to a playlist is the end goal, aren't we being actively discouraged from really pushing the boundaries of our own voice as an artist and exploring where we actually want to go creatively? And does that immediate gratification of instant success come at the cost of the longevity of our work? Well, to avoid completely stepping all over my friend Venus Theory's video on this subject, which is an excellent video by the way, I'm going to take a different approach and just talk about my own personal experience with this and how I ended up here doing what I'm doing today, as opposed to just pursuing the things that were working for me back in the day. In early 2018, I was still pretty green as an artist, at least as a recording artist. I had only been releasing music for a couple of years, and coming from a classically trained background, I really had no idea how to get my music out there, whatever that meant. All I knew was that I was having a really fun time experimenting with recording, production, synthesis, all those things that were brand new to me. I was very bad at recording, and my own instrument, the piano, is a particularly difficult instrument to record well and get to sound good, especially with the cheap mics that I had at the time. So I was primarily working in the box, because I also had my tiny first little studio in a very small rental house where when the wind would blow, you could almost feel it coming through the cracks in the walls. And that rental house also sat at the corner of a very busy intersection where 18-wheeler trucks would come through and Jake brake right in front of the house, and it was just way too noisy. I could not actually record there. So I did all my early recordings at my church, where I still serve as the organist and director of music. There's a lovely little Yamaha upright in the sanctuary that sounds really good in there, and I learned from Oliver Arnolds that if you put the felt rail down, it sounded really cool and ethereal, and I was really having fun experimenting with that. So I loaded up my little PreSonus audio interface, my cheap Toshiba laptop, and of course my cheap pair of less than $100 CAD microphones, and just recorded a series of improvisations, just exploring the sound of the piano in that space and miking it in different ways. In fact, I chose to put the mic at one point behind the soundboard of the piano and actually recorded an entire track with it facing the wrong way. Did I mention I was really bad at recording? Well, I actually liked the way that those improvisations turned out. After a couple of days of recording, I hastily mixed them as best I could in my very noisy studio and proceeded to upload them to DistroKid, I believe was the distributor that I was using. Well, I chose one of the first tracks that I had made as the first single for that little album. And somehow, unbeknownst to me, even to this day, it landed on some really big Spotify playlists. And very quickly, my monthly listeners went from a couple thousand to nearly 100,000 in a matter of days and weeks. And for the first time, I was actually receiving a measurable amount of income from streaming. And that almost ruined my career. I had accidentally stumbled upon the very playlist-friendly genre of neoclassical, felt peaceful piano. It wasn't intentional on my part, it was just what I wanted to make and explore making at that time. But what I found was a whole lot of music that seemed to be made and produced for the purpose, the sole purpose it seemed, of getting on those playlists. And it all seemed very formulaic and frankly, a little boring to me. So I found myself at kind of a crossroads as an artist. And it was more tempting than I'd like to admit to just continue making that album over and over because I was seemingly being rewarded for that. And quite frankly, I could churn those out in no time. But if I was being honest with myself, I still had no idea what I was doing, and there were so many things that I still wanted to explore in terms of getting better at production and getting more into synthesis and sound design. All things that I couldn't really exercise those skills if I just continued to make the same kind of music that I was being rewarded for making. Ultimately, I felt I would be really bored if I just sort of stayed in the lane that the Spotify algorithm had assigned to me. So I veered off, and despite the occasional bump here and there over time, I did see my numbers gradually kind of come back down. And I'm not gonna lie, it didn't feel good. I was using that as a metric of success. I didn't want to see those numbers go away, thanks to my own ego. But I think it was in late 2020, something happened that kind of validated my decision to explore other areas. That track, Carry Me Slowly, got taken off a lot of those big playlists. And after earning hundreds of dollars a month for me for a couple years, it was suddenly earning basically nothing. And it confirmed my suspicion that I had just as little control over when those tracks are removed from playlist as I had over when they were added. None. But I could control one thing, and that was figuring out what I wanted to say as an artist and trying to increase my skill at being able to communicate what I wanted to say as an artist. This was my own artistic voice, which I talk about a lot on this channel, the kind of music that I wanted to make. Because I went this route, I've had people reach out to me. I've been approached rather than always having to pursue, because my music stood out to them in some way. And that's the thing about being successful on playlists. The whole point of a playlist is not to stand out. If someone puts on your playlist at a party, they don't want one track to not fit within the mood of the rest of the tracks. And especially in the genres that I'm closest to, which would be electronic ambient music and modern classical music, oftentimes the whole point is not to stand out, and that's okay. Like, if that's what you want to make, that's fine. So I'm not trying to disparage anyone who is having success in playlisting and that's what they love to do. By all means, continue to do that. But it was important for me to realize that I never want to make music that is solely to be ignored. Sorry, Brian Eno. I've also learned a lot more skills that I talked about before. Synthesis, sound design, production, mixing, all of those elements that I never ever would have learned had I just stayed in my lane. And that has actually led to more work and more ability to me to provide for myself and my family that is not just dependent on streaming income, which is not a very dependable source of income. Ultimately, I'm thankful that I didn't have even more success in streaming, as weird as that sounds, simply for the fact that I've been forced to explore other ways to support myself. And I think that diversification in your skill set is a really valuable tool to have if you do want to make any kind of a living or an income, either directly or indirectly from music. And I think a lot of people, the purist among us, see that as selling out in some way. It's like, oh, well, you just couldn't make it with your music, so you've had to do other things. And I actually think it couldn't be more the opposite. What I do here is essentially teaching. And composers have been doing that for centuries as a way to supplement their income when making money from music either wasn't their goal or wasn't enough. My very own composition teacher once told me, I teach so I don't have to write shit. And while I kind of took offense to that as his student, after all, over the years I've come to kind of realize what he was saying. With this approach, my music is free to be whatever I want it to be. The burden of paying the bills is removed from my music. My music is not a product. And that removes a major obstacle that stands between a lot of artists and the music that they really want to make. Paying the bills with their music. And that's not to say I don't still make some income from my music, but I'm not dependent on that. And I think it's wise to diversify in other areas if you can. And if that's working a job that's not related to music so that you can have music as your passion, that's completely fine, and it's probably a really good thing in some cases. I still work as an organist as well because it's steady and reliable. So now, my knowledge and experience is the product, not my music. And because of that, it's been the most creatively rewarding period of my life over the last couple years. And that's all come as a result of just sharing what I know with other people who might find it interesting. So if you're finding that you feel boxed in, maybe just don't play that playlisting game anymore. You don't have to do it. To be honest, there's not that much money at stake. You have to be doing crazy numbers to make decent money. Maybe just take a step back and ask yourself why you're doing music to begin with. When your music becomes a product designed to fit into a formulaic box that you don't necessarily want to exist within, then sometimes the joy of making it can fade. And if you're happy making music in this way, that's great. This video really isn't for you. In the somewhat paraphrased words of Josh Homme, if you ask anything from music besides the joy of making it, you're asking too much. If you would like to support what I do here on this channel and get access to some exclusive videos and live streams, you can become a member by hitting the join button down below, and I'll love you forever, or at least as long as you're a member. Thanks as always for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you next time.